And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again from across the Louisiana plain, where we are elevating the cause and the voice of constitutional conservatism in the state of Louisiana, advancing the cause of constitutional conservatives, and day by day draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thanks for having us along for part of your day today. We're so grateful to you. You are the best listening family anyone could possibly hope for, and we are only here because of your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you're looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd really appreciate it if you'd help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom as well. To do that, you can like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, and share it with your friends and family members. You can even share short clips instead of the full episodes from our YouTube and Rumble channels. The links to those are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. Well, today we're thrilled to have Representative Julie Emerson joining us. We'll be talking to her shortly about the outcomes of this past special session, and in particular the closed primary bill that she brought. But first, let me read the scripture of the day. It is from Psalms chapter 91, and it's verses 1 through 4. And it says, "When you abide under the shadow of Shaddai," and Shaddai, the Hebrew word for that means God of the mountain, God the destroyer of enemies, God the self-sufficient one, God the nurturer of babies, and God the Almighty. So when you abide under him, you are hidden in the strength of God Most High. He's the hope that holds me and the stronghold to shelter me, the only God for me and my great confidence. He will rescue you from every hidden trap of the enemy, and he will protect you from false accusation and any deadly curse. His massive arms are wrapped around you, protecting you. You can run under his covering of majesty and hide. His arms of faithfulness are a shield, keeping you from harm. And this passage is a reminder that we're safe when we hide ourselves in the Lord. He is the self-sufficient one who protects us, cares for us, and destroys those who try to harm us. Hiding ourselves in the Lord, though, doesn't mean hiding from our responsibilities or duties to act. I think that kind of gives us a picture of running into a closet during a storm and hiding. But what it really means is that we clothe ourselves in the Lord. The picture is that we are so wrapped in communion with him, in prayer and worship and reading and consuming the scriptures, that because of our closeness with the Lord, he becomes our protection and our armor as we go out to do the work he's called us to do in the spiritual war that he's called us to take ground in.
Yeah. And it definitely does not mean inaction. It means taking action under the protection and the sheltering of God, which not only makes our work more rewarding, but probably makes it much more effective as well. That Psalm 91 is probably my favorite psalm because it really does speak of the protection of God within the context of action. It's like contemplatives in action, prayerful inaction, and really sort of alludes to St. Paul, who says that we're to pray unceasingly. We are to seek the protection of God unceasingly. So that is so powerful and such a good reminder. Well, as you mentioned in the intro, Danielle, we have such a privilege of having Representative Julie Emerson with us today, I believe the third term conservative state rep, District 39. If you recall, Julie was one of the 19 legislators who stood strong in the 2023 session against busting the spending cap. And we just have great respect for her. And it's such a pleasure to have you with us, Julie. How are you?
Thank you, guys. I appreciate being on. Sorry, I sound a little bit different, a little under the weather, but I think we're going to make it through. I'm excited to be on with you.
Thank you so much. Give us a sense here, Julie, at the outset. As I said, you're a veteran state representative. Give us a sense at the outset of your sense looking back on the very recent special session, how it compares to previous sessions that you've been a part of. Do you sense that there'll be unity in the House going forward to effectively advance a conservative agenda?
Chris, I really do. I mean, and I certainly understand a lot of our friends were not necessarily excited about some of the things that came out of this special session. But man, I tell you, it was such a different feeling being in the Capitol. Obviously, Governor Landry being there and a much more conservative legislature, in my opinion. And so while we may not have gotten everything in perfect form, just the whole attitude and the mood of the place was entirely different than anything I've experienced in the last 8 years. So it may not have been perfect, but it's a whole lot better.
Well, that's so encouraging. And we have to ask as well, what are your thoughts on the Senate? Do you think they're going to be a cooperative partner? Because I really am hoping that they're not going to try and pull the teeth out of every single bill that comes through their way from the House.
Well, the funny thing is it kind of just feels like no matter where bills start, if they start in the House, the Senate's going to have a say on them. And honestly, if bills start in the Senate, the House is going to have a little bit of a say on them. So I mean, the House and the Senate, just like in the U.S. Congress, are slightly different bodies. The House has more people. We're kind of the rabble rousers, I guess you'd say. We're a little bit more chaotic over there. And, I guess we're supposed to be maybe a little bit more in touch with the people. We represent fewer people. And the Senate is just a slightly different body. So, but I'll say this. I mean, look, I might be a little bit nicer about it than some other people or certainly people looking from the outside in. But again, it's not perfect, but man, it's so much better. I mean, well, it really, really is.
Well, you definitely have some new conservative senators in there, and so we certainly hope that on a broad range of issues, they would be complimentary of the House and keep bills intact when they get to the Senate. Julie, there've been a number of representatives who've told us the expression the Senate is too often a place where good legislation goes to die, and I'm not saying that's the case all the time by any stretch, but it is good to hear you suggest that you think it will be a different atmosphere over there, and we do have some good ones. I wanted to ask you specifically about your legislation from the special session, HB 17, your closed primary legislation, which quite frankly raised some red flags from our broad range of listeners and citizens about what exactly occurred on the Senate side to your bill. I know that when it came out of the House, it was a great piece of legislation. It's not horrible now. It does something for sure, but it was a very strong piece of legislation when it came out of the House. And I know Beryl Amity was a co-author on it, but it was such a good bill. And then when it got over to the Senate, the Senate amendments excluded. The first issue I wanted to ask you about was allowed no party voters to vote in Republican Party primaries, which was added in the Senate. I mean, we have 600,000 or 800,000 no party voters in Louisiana, and the concern that people have is that will compromise the integrity of party primaries, as we've seen in other states. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's certainly a lot to that multifaceted question, certainly. But I mean, look, you guys know, and if you listen to any of the debate, most states in the U.S. have some type of party primary system. I know we had a lot of our different elected officials kind of weighing in from the outside, but I believe the only states that do not have some type of party primary system are Louisiana, California, Washington. All have some sort of jungle primary or top two advance, regardless of party. And then Maine and Alaska now have the ranked choice voting.
And that's not very good company to keep in terms of election integrity and in terms of conservative politics.
Yeah, completely agree. Anytime you're in the same conversation with Washington and California, I don't really think Louisiana fits in that category. It's like one of these things is not like the other.
Exactly.
But look, I mean, I think that any time that you make a wholesale change to anything, especially the way that we do elections, it takes some getting used to it, because it's really, really easy for the people who don't want it or don't like it, or maybe they think they can't win a Republican primary. It's super easy for them to just go and try to get some support from voters by saying, well, this is going to disenfranchise no party or unaffiliated voters, or this is going to, why should we be doing this? What's wrong with our elections? Well, again, this is the way that most other states in America do it. So, look, I think that in the case of the unaffiliated voters, certainly no one was trying to disenfranchise any voters whatsoever. This is a party primary process. And anytime that you are a member of an organization or a club or a group, those members of that organization are the ones who get to vote on the bylaws and the board and the chairman and everything of that group. So it's a very similar situation here. I wasn't crazy about the no party or the unaffiliated voters. However, other states have what's called an open primary, and that just means that anybody can walk in on election day and say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. That's not what we did here. So we do have party registration. Obviously, Republicans will go vote in the Republican primary. Democrats will go vote in the Democrat primary. Your unaffiliated voters, which are not as high a turnout voters as those registered in a party, and just by my estimation, what I've seen, we have more unaffiliated voters who lean a little bit more conservative than not. So, I wasn't super excited about adding that, but I don't think it is the end of the world. I think it is still a good piece of legislation. Chris, you mentioned about party switching and stuff like that. I mean, this is not a situation where, like in a state I'm pretty familiar with, because I went to grad school over there in South Carolina, Democrats can go vote in a Republican primary. That's not what we did here. Now, certainly a Democrat, I guess, could go switch to unaffiliated and then vote in the primary, but they still have to be registered Democrat to go vote in a Democrat presidential primary. So, I know there are some people like us who are just political junkies and follow the process, but for somebody to consistently keep switching back and forth, that's a lot of organization. And I'm not saying they can't do it, but just realistically, I think that what we passed is still going to be something that's very positive for Louisiana.
Yeah, I think, Julie, I think that I don't think that the legislation is entirely ineffective. I think that it is definitely a start because of what you just said. There's no question about that. Just the concern that people have at this point is that, you have a situation where not even so much the no party people, because I would agree with you that most of the no party, or many of the no party, or most of the no party in Louisiana probably does lean conservative. So that may not be a huge issue, but there is the danger, a real danger of having Democrats in a major statewide election becoming no party and then going in and sabotaging a Republican primary. And I think that danger is not just a theoretical one. I think it's a real one.
Yeah. And one thing, Julie, that Chris and I have talked about prior to this is one potential safeguard for that is just moving the date that people are allowed to switch parties or become unaffiliated to before the qualifying period for candidates, because it seems like if you're going to organize to switch parties, it will probably be after you have a full picture of what the landscape looks like. So that was one thought that we had that we wanted to make sure we mentioned to you in case you want to bring this again.
Well, and we will actually be bringing I guess what's kind of deemed a little bit of a cleanup bill in the regular session, but also I am going to try to continue to expound upon it. I think we're going to have some discussions on adding other offices to it. As I'm sure you guys watched, some of the offices that we had included originally got stripped from the bill. So, I think there's going to be a longer debate on a lot of that. And look, I think certainly there's plenty of people who just didn't want to see it passed at all. But there are certainly plenty of them that didn't want to see certain offices in there. But one of the concerns that was raised about the timing with the legislature in the legislative session and the timing of the primary being in the spring, I think with a little bit more time, I can help alleviate some of those concerns because, our members of Congress are always in session and they have to run in party primaries when they're in DC. So it's not out of the question. And I mean, we're just in Baton Rouge. So, but if the party primary is in March, it'll actually be over by the time we get to session. So, I think I can alleviate some of those concerns and hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to pretty quickly add more offices to it.
Yeah. Speaking of more offices, Julie, our group, LCAG, and the State of Freedom for that matter, are, our focus, our singular focus now is really on the state legislature and, creating as many possibilities and a mechanism whereby conservative Republicans have a better chance of being elected. And so that's one of the reasons why we're disappointed that the state legislature was excised out of the purview of the bill. That we believe that would be a very good mechanism to ensure that we get good conservatives in the legislature, because we don't make any bones of it on our program that a lot of good legislation has been killed or seriously undermined by rhinos in the legislature, of whom you are not one. But it is so having the state legislature included in the purview of the closed primary bill to us is extraordinarily important. And so hopefully going forward, that can be put back in the bill. And I wanted to mention also to you, just to reemphasize what Danielle said about the deadline for switching the parties. We had discussed maybe including in the bill a deadline for switching from Republican to Democrat, Democrat for Republican, or whatever, should be before qualifying begins. That way, you don't have a chance to survey the field and you don't have a chance to sabotage a primary because you don't know who's going to be in it yet. And so I think that could be a way to foreclose that possibility, or at least diminish the threat.
Yeah, so we have had some of those discussions. Actually, not that exact one, but sort of in the same vein, talking about I guess a deadline to declare for the unaffiliated which primary you want to vote in. So that would, not exactly what you're saying, but I think that would certainly help, our elections division prepare for the ballots and obviously how many people are going to be in each primary and things of that nature. So, So either way, I think could probably alleviate some of those concerns.
Because our members are going to be very happy to hear, that you have some plans to tweak it and clean up some of the concerns that they have. That they're going to be very refreshed to hear that. And Representative Amity, frankly, indicated that she would be interested in doing the same thing on the bill, because like I said, it's definitely not nothing. And we've made it very clear that it is definitely an improvement. But I hear your point, Julie, about when you're making such big changes that sometimes the changes, you can't make them all in one swipe. And you got to go back in and tweak some things and clean some things up.
Well, and Chris, honestly, one thing that I did learn throughout this whole process is, public buy-in. And of course, you guys do a lot of this and trying to energize people to contact their legislators. Public buy-in is so important. And I did learn throughout doing this that, a lot of our folks that are really, really engaged in the process, they absolutely saw the need for this. But I think there were a lot of people out there just reading the media reports and they just had never really thought about it, And so they just kind of were like, well, why would we totally change the way that we do elections? And so helping people understand what this process is like and then getting them to actually practically do it, I think is going to go a long way. And, look, I wish that the wheels of government rotated a lot faster than they do.
Right.
But
absolutely.
You're not alone.
They just don't.
Yeah.
So, but look, I mean, coming in, Governor Landry in his first special session in the second week as governor, and pushing this major change. And I was certainly very proud and excited to be able to help do that alongside him and actually getting something across the finish line. And really, look, I mean, again, I know there were a lot of people upset that we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but the fact that we got about 75 to 80% of what we wanted was, in my opinion, huge. It really was.
Yeah. And you absolutely did. And just for the benefit of our listeners, just so they'll know, your original version of the bill when it came out of the House, and then we can move on, but your original version when it came out of the House did include the state legislators. And there was not a provision in the bill when it came out of the House that would allow the no party to vote in the Republican primaries. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And so we actually, when it came out of the House, it included the federal level, so Congress and Senate. It included statewide. It included the legislature. It included Bessie, PSC, and then district, Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court.
Yeah, really, really great bill. Definitely.
I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information.
What about the special session on crime, Julie? What have you heard about that? I know the governor wants to call, or maybe has called, the special session on crime. Obviously, a hugely important issue in our state. Lieutenant Nungesser said a while back when we had him on the show that he's not convinced at this point that New Orleans is safe enough right now to be able to host a major event, including the Super Bowl, which is planned to be in New Orleans. What are your thoughts on the crime and what can get done in the special session on crime in Louisiana?
Well, look, I mean, I think that unfortunately crime in Louisiana has been a problem for a long time. And there's been a lot of attempts to fix things here and there, but we really got to buckle down and get serious about it. I know that some of the exact pieces of legislation that the governor's interested in getting through, I think he's going to be meeting with legislative leadership probably starting today, I think in the next couple of days, to kind of brief them on what some of his plans are. I'm sure we'll have a lot of, depending on the scope of the call, I'm sure we'll have a lot of legislators come up with some of their own ideas. I think you'll see some changes to some of the criminal justice reform measures that were instituted in 2017 under Governor Edwards. I think you'll see a rollback of some of those. You know, I think a lot of it, unfortunately, with the JRI in 2017, we had some implementation issues, in my opinion. And look, I think all of us, when you sit back and you look at our prison population and the fact that most of those folks will eventually get out of prison one day, you know, you look at some of the rehabilitation programs and some of the reentry programs that we have to try to set some people up for success and try not to reoffend. You know, I hope some of that stays in place, but you know, unfortunately, you're just going to have that cyclical issue of people getting out and they just go right back to reoffending. I think that we just have to really look at some of the. I know there's going to be probably some mandatory minimum issues, probably some rollback of some of the good time, good behavior issues, stuff like that, and just try to get more truth in sentencing and some of those issues.
So we're talking about, you know, harsher penalties on the one hand, and on the other hand, so gratifying to hear you talk about the recidivism and the cyclical process of crime so much. I mean, there are very few people, in my view, and you may differ, but I don't think that there are many people who are completely beyond the capacity for rehabilitation or redemption. I think that category is very, very small. And so I think that if we want to really get to the core of the problem, we've got to talk about more than simply locking people up so they can get out, go commit more crime, get back in. We've got to have some real rehabilitation and reentry programs that make a big difference, because I think people respond to those.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And, Chris, some of the issues that I worked on back in 2017, which seems like a lifetime ago,
I bet.
had to do with reentry, talking about trying to help people get better jobs, find places to live, reconnect with their families. All of that is incredibly important because, look, I mean, we prayed and read some scripture at the beginning of this podcast, which I really appreciate. And so, I believe in redemption, and I think that it is possible for everyone. But unfortunately, I think that you just have some people out there that they truly need a heart change and they're not there yet. And we have a responsibility to keep our citizens safe. And I think that we have to take that very seriously. I mean, you can't minimize what victims have gone through. It's truly heartbreaking. I know that my understanding is that, Governor Landry he's certainly been in touch with a lot of victims and gotten a lot of feedback from them on some of their thoughts on this upcoming session. So, look, I hope we get it right this time. I really do. It's a very nuanced thing. It's a very intricate thing. And look, I actually have a lot of faith in Debbie Villio. She's the new chairman of criminal justice. She's a former prosecutor. I think that she's seen a lot and has a tremendous amount of experience. So I think she's going to be great leading that committee. And I'm like I said, I hope we get it right.
I hope so too. And I'm really glad that y'all brought up this idea, kind of the criminal justice reform idea, because just when we talk about a special session on crime, just on its face, my reaction is, don't we have enough laws? Enforcement is really a big problem, and we have talked to AG Liz Muriel about her work with the sheriffs and DAs, and so hopefully we'll start seeing some fruit of that soon. But there are some pieces here for the legislature as well in terms of making a path for people to not reoffend, as you said so well, Julie.
Yeah.
Well, and look, I mean, I think that, just absolute shout out to our men and women in law enforcement. And I think a big part of that too is just them knowing that we have their back too. So
very, very important. Speaking of that, Julie, I can't remember which guest, a couple of guests have talked to us about law enforcement generally and the morale in many of the law enforcement agencies in Louisiana. I believe the attrition rate in the New Orleans PD is significant. Even in Baton Rouge, a significant number of police officers have quit. What are your thoughts on the morale and the spirit in police departments? And when you say stand behind them, what does that look like legislatively?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I don't know that there's necessarily any particular legislation as far as that goes. I just think the overall support, obviously we've dealt with qualified immunity issues before, and just making sure that they're protected. But look, it's a tough place. The things that our law enforcement officers have to see day in and day out, just the violence, the domestic violence, the abuse of children. I mean, just so many different things that they have to deal with. And I can't imagine. So, I just think that, and look, I mean, I think we all know, and we can't always throw money at problems and say, oh, well, this money will fix this, because we try to do that.
That doesn't work.
Well, we try to do that in education all the time. And, we're not getting better outcomes, but
not at all.
Look, I mean, I think anything that we can do to, continuously try to support our law enforcement just with, better pay and try to give them a better quality of life is really important. But just, honestly, just simple things, just, public displays of thanks. I mean, I just think that, some of my immediate neighbors in my neighborhood are in law enforcement, and just thanking them for what they do. And,
That's so important.
I see the long hours they put in. I'll be getting home late one night and I'll see them pulling in really late as well. And so,
yeah,
I mean, just building that better morale there, I think, is really, really important. I always try to go, at least before the beginning of session and kind of meet with my chiefs and local law enforcement and stuff, and just kind of see what's going on with them, what they're hearing about the upcoming session, anything that they're worried about, and just keeping those good lines of communication so they know they can reach out to you.
Yeah. I have 4 sons, Julie, and I teach them along the lines of what you just said. Whenever we are out anywhere and we see either a soldier or a law enforcement officer, we always make it a point, and they always make it a point, to go up to them and personally thank them for their service. And I think that it seems like a small gesture, but it really, really means a lot, to people. So it's good to hear you say that. Now, let me ask you about the qualified immunity. I know in the last session, or maybe it was 2 sessions ago, I can't remember, there was a push to eliminate qualified immunity, and it was obviously defeated. And for the benefit of our listeners, qualified immunity basically says that you can't second guess police officers who make split-second decisions under the best of knowledge and understanding that they have in that moment. You don't get to go back and second guess them. And that doctrine's very, very important. Some people would argue that it's been abused, but it is a very important doctrine, because it would really have a chilling effect on law enforcement if that were to be eliminated. Do you have any reason to believe that there's going to be another effort in the legislature? Have you heard anything to eliminate qualified immunity?
Look, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, some of the bills are brought again, but, we defeated those every single year. And I was on the committee almost every single time, on the civil law committee, when those came before us. And look, I'm not saying that every single police officer is perfect, and this has obviously been a hot button issue, but I think that they have great training. Do I think it could be better? Sure. I mean, I'm sure we could always have better training, but I think that they have great training. And, look, I mean, they do have to make very split-second decisions under great duress all the time to try to protect themselves and protect the public and people around them. So I certainly believe that they deserve a lot of grace in those scenarios. You have seen some egregious situations, and those people have been tried, and you have some situations where it was excessive. But again, in my opinion, we have to put faith and trust in our law enforcement officers to make proper split-second decisions to keep the public safe, and I think that I think they deserve for us to have their back.
I agree with that. And maybe just to shift gears a little bit, Julie, what are you thinking about in terms of the regular session? Do you have, have you pre-filed bills? Are you looking at any particular legislation? And is there legislation others are bringing that you're looking forward to supporting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking forward to, and I don't know, I can't say exactly what this is going to look like yet because we're still working on it, but look, expanding school choice and just the way that we do education in Louisiana, because look, just like we're having this big focus on the crime session, we've tried to throw so many different little things at our education system along the way to get us to not be, 47th or worse. And it's just not working. So look, just like we're trying to kind of reform the way that we do elections with the closed primary bill, I think we need some major changes in education and the way that we do education in this state.
I think Cade Brumley would agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Cade. I think that he's been good, and I think he's continuing to get even better and better in leading and standing with us. And so I really believe that we can make some major changes in the way that we actually do education and the way that we do education funding, because we've got to make some drastic changes to have better outcomes. We just do. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results is insanity, right? So we're not making major drastic leaps. We're doing better, but we're not making big jumps.
Yeah. One of the big concerns, Julie, that people have, and I know this is something that Superintendent Brumley has promoted vigorously before the Bessie Board, is diverting public funds, a portion of public funds, for vocational training in high school, recognizing that increasing number of young people are simply not going to choose the traditional college route. And it would be such a wise appropriation of money to use in order to train people in skilled labor and skilled vocational trades. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I 100% completely agree with that. I think that, for a very, very long time, there was this big push, and certainly even as I was growing up and getting ready for college, there was a big push of you got to go to a four-year institution. When you graduate, you got to go to college. If you don't, something's wrong or you failed or something like that. And it really has led to this gigantic gap of skilled labor. We just don't have it anymore. And those are good paying jobs. I mean, those are, 75, 80,000, and then working your way up to way more than six figures. I mean,
absolutely.
And so, that to me, if you can get a kid who, maybe academia is not their thing, but they're, can really good with their hands and they can be a great welder. And, maybe they do a couple years of vocational school or learn something in high school, and then they start out making about $80,000. I mean, that's huge.
It's huge for families and it's huge for the economy.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's absolutely needed. And look, we've talked, even kind of tying back into the crime session with that. I mean, look, a lot of times you have students who, again, they just maybe they haven't made great grades, but if you really take a kid who might graduate high school with not good enough grades to get into college, and they don't really know what to do, and so they turn to a life of crime. If you can channel that into more skilled labor, then that could completely change the trajectory and even try to solve some of our prison population issue as well. So,
Julie, it's so interesting. I've never made that connection directly between increased opportunity for vocational training in high school and a reduction in crime. But you're so very right that probably would have a very positive effect on crime in Louisiana, and it's certainly something that needs to be encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just, if you can just channel kids in the right direction, and I think that is part of kind of some of the changes that we need to make in education as well, because when you look at each individual kid and trying to point them in the right direction of where to go versus just, hey, stuff everybody in a classroom and teach things and pass this test and go on, if we can try to get down to individual kids and what their needs are, I think we create a better society as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's such a stigma associated still with the kid who says, well, I don't want to go to college. I don't want to do the 4-year route. Not as much there used to be, but there's still a stigma associated with that. So it definitely needs to be encouraged, and I think that would produce some really good outcomes.
Well, and look, I mean, in the same vein too, we've talked a whole lot about college debt and debt forgiveness on a national level, right? And I'm certainly not for that, but it is a reality that you have students, especially in my generation, who have this astronomical college debt. I mean, like, it's absurd, and hey, look, they signed on for it and they should pay it. But man, I mean, some of these people were just steered totally in the wrong direction. And They have degrees. I mean, look, if you have $100,000 worth of debt and you got an engineering degree and you're making a couple $100,000 a year, that's one thing. But man, I mean, some of these people, and I mean, look, we all make our own choices, but some people were advised very poorly. That's all I can say.
Agree. There's some very useless degrees out there.
Right. Exactly. And as Cade Brumley said, they end up, people who made the wrong choice, maybe gotten bad advice, they end up, broke, in debt, and unemployed. And is that the situation that they want to be in?
Well, I mean, it's a shame because you're literally talking about an 18-year-old who
Exactly.
is graduating high school, is about to walk out into the world for the first time, and they want to go to this cool college in this cool location, and they're not thinking about, oh, when you're 65 and you're still paying off your college debt. They're just not thinking about that.
Right. They're not. Awesome. Well, Julie, any final words for our listeners before we let you go?
Well, look, guys, I appreciate the work that you do. And look, I think that the role that you serve in this whole crazy political and government thing that we're doing is so incredibly important to keep people informed. And so thank you. And look, I know that not everybody was excited with every single thing that came out of our first session, but I can't stress enough that instead of having like this issue of having a governor that we didn't particularly agree with at all and having people undermine everybody at every turn, it was more of a like disagreement among friends. I mean, it was like this weird environment of we all generally have the same desires and hopes for the state of Louisiana in the direction that we want to go in. Just a few disagreements here and there along the way, but man, I think I'm still very, very excited and hopeful for the future. I think we're going to make a lot of great strides. And I mean, look, next year, obviously, we're going to be really digging into tax policy and trying to do tax reform. I'm very honored to chair Ways and Means and have been digging into some of that. And I'm looking forward to working with my friend Richard Nelson, our new Secretary of the Department of Revenue, and just, maybe looking at some ways that we can reduce our taxes in this state and create a better economy. So y'all keep at it and keep holding us accountable, and appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on. Okay. Yeah, I got to ask you this last, though, just before you go. What about abolishing the state income tax? Several people have said that if we did that, other states have done that would be a good thing to do in Louisiana.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw some of the reports that came out of the task forces last week, but that was a big recommendation from the taxation task force, I guess you'd call it. So I think that, pushing toward getting rid of the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, I mean, I think it's going to possibly be a phase-in situation. I mean, I've had very brief conversations about it, so nothing's set in stone yet, and we can't do it until next year anyway. But no, I mean, I think that is a direction that we want to look at. Of course, a lot of our neighboring states have moved in that direction and are thriving and doing a lot better than Louisiana. So it is certainly a big item that's on the table, and I look forward to trying to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, we'll be keeping a close eye on it and looking forward to seeing you in the regular session. Thank you for all your good work you're doing, and keep up the good work, and God bless you today.
All right. Thank you guys so much. God bless.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye-bye.
Chris, that's encouraging. I really appreciate that she felt so positive about just the conduct amongst the legislators. That they, it seems like a unified body. It seemed like the backbiting and the undermining isn't happening. And that was something that was, I think, front and center. It was just a continual negative part of the last legislature. So this seems like it's going in a hopeful direction, the direction that we have been hoping and praying and working very hard for it to go.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Danielle, you're right. I don't think the toxic nature of the environment there exists nearly to the degree that it did in 2023, with Paige Cortez leading the Senate and Clay Scheck-Snyder leading the House. They created such an atmosphere of toxicity there, and you could feel it. And one thing I'll say is I really did not feel that most recently in the special session, and I think that's a very, very good sign. Another thing that I'm very happy to hear is that on this HB 17, that Julie is interested and inclined to bring some cleanup legislation, and we're hopeful that two of the things that are going to be cleaned up in it are the no parties being allowed to vote in the party primaries, and also including the state legislature in the purview of the bill. Those are just two extremely important items, and I know that we will be doing calls to action on that at the start of the session.
Yeah, and of course it's great to hear from her that keeping the drumbeat up and keeping the calls to action up really keeps them supported. I think, because you can tell that she is moving in the same direction as her constituents. She wants to make the kind of reforms that people like us, people with our values, want to see, and it's up to us to provide the support and the air cover for them to do that.
Yeah, it not only makes a difference, strong grassroots advocacy, I think very often it makes the difference.
All of the difference, absolutely.
Absolutely. It makes all of the difference. Well, we're going to be following it very, very closely. Well, Danielle, I don't ever like to close without thanking the listeners to the State of Freedom for supporting us and supporting our efforts to advance the cause of conservatism in Louisiana and broaden the platform for conservative voices across the state. We wouldn't be where we are. We couldn't be doing what we're doing without the support of our listeners. So I thank our listeners for all they do, and I encourage them to continue to subscribe and share the State of Freedom.
Yes, and if you'd like to support us financially, you can do that by going to freedomstate.us or sending a check to P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana, 70343. And Chris, as we said, LeCag is going to be front and center, is already front and center in this fight. And hopefully it's not going to be too much of a fight. Hopefully we'll be moving in the same direction. It'll be more about negotiating than fighting this time. But if it's going to be a fight, we'll be there for the fight as well, right?
We'll absolutely be there. LeCag, we are the eyes, the ears, and the voice of ordinary Louisiana citizens across the state. And that is our loyalty to citizens and to the Constitution. And we will be there. And we will praise legislators and encourage legislators when they do the right thing. And we're going to hold legislators accountable when they fail the citizens. And hopefully, as you mentioned, Danielle, that won't happen very often. And we're positive that it won't. But we're going to be there, and we're going to be acting vigilantly on behalf of citizens in Louisiana. We encourage your continued support of LeCag as members, or simply to go on our website and make a donation to LeCag, because it is so very important to have the resources we need to continue forward, being your eyes and your ears.
That's right, and that's www.lecag.org.
That's right. And also our P.O. Box, if you want to mail a check, is P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70896. And we're continuing forward every day, Danielle. I get more and more excited about our growth, our development, the difference that we are making. And I just have no doubt, that if we continue to stay focused, continue to pray, continue to examine our motives, and continue to be disciplined every day, we will take each day another step to advance the cause of freedom and liberty in Louisiana.
Amen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana, 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, lacag.org, or email chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.